Have you with me now? If you're listening on some of the CMG stations around the country, Mark K should be here, and I'm here instead. He's out and will return. The phone number here, if you want to be a part of the program, 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. Have you noticed this trend? And it's a very intentional trend in post-Christian America, if you will. We've now got, we used to have a liturgical calendar that the nation participated in. You would have New Year's, of course, and that would go into the Lenten season, and then you would have Easter. You would have Memorial Day. You would have summer vacation. You would get into school going back and Labor Day. Some schools not going back until Labor Day. You'd get into Halloween and then Thanksgiving, and then you would have Christmas. And now we've got an increasingly secularized holiday situation where you've got New Year's, you less have Easter, you have spring break. You've got Memorial Day, then you've got an entire Pride month. It can't be a day or a week. It's got to be a whole month. Then you got the 4th of July, which you may or may not celebrate because of the systemic racism of the nation. Somewhere in there, you've got Juneteenth, which needs to be a celebration, but it competes with Pride Month, so it kind of is pushed aside and maybe is coming back. And then the return of school, and you've still got Labor Day, which is bigger than it was. You got Veterans Day in there and Thanksgiving. You've got Christmas in there, but it's more a winter holiday break now. It's less Christmas. And the void left by the exit of religion from the public square fills in with secularism, and we've got these new things we've got to pay attention to. One of those things, which we have to pay attention to, is the Tulsa race riot. That you're now a bigot if you refer to it as the Tulsa race riot. It must be the Tulsa race massacre. I am on right now live on KRMG in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Mark K will be back. I was going to talk about this topic anyway. It's kind of cool that Tulsa's got me live right now while I'm talking about this topic because it's the big deal. The Tulsa race riot or the Tulsa race massacre, however you want to talk about it, it's being used to push a political agenda. I want to talk in a couple of ways about it, and I need you to understand something out of the gate. There is a conservative impulse, just as there is a progressive impulse, that when the other side is saying X, Y, or Z, our side then says the negative, the opposite, the counter. So one side says the Tulsa race riot or Tulsa race massacre is a very big deal. So the other side says, no, actually, it's not. Everyone wants to be contrarian to the other side. As a matter of fact, it was a very big freaking deal. On May 31st and June 1st, 1921, white citizens in Tulsa, Oklahoma, engaged in the systematic destruction of the Greenwood District in Tulsa, Oklahoma, which was essentially the Black Wall Street, as many described it. One of the most prosperous black communities in the nation. A precipitating event was the sexual assault on a 17-year-old white girl and the deaths of 10 white men, led the white citizens and the local government to round up black citizens and detain most of them really for their protection as the riots got out of control. And but then they essentially leveled the Greenwood District. It was notable because it was the first time domestically aircraft were used to rain down fire on positions. It was civilians, American citizen civilians with biplanes that were firing down upon the black residents. As a friend of mine said, a few weeks later, the military would use airplanes to quell a riot, but this was the first time it happened, and it was not military, it was citizens. It was bad. And then there was an engaged government cover-up, and it turns out probably hundreds of people died. Now, in the 1990s, a bipartisan commission in Oklahoma was formed. Frank Keating, the governor in Oklahoma, oversaw this. He was a Republican. And by 2001, they had an airing of grievances. They pushed for a number of steps, scholarships, and other things to make right what had happened. Some people want more. Some people have agitated for reparations. But it really was a revelation. A lot of people had not heard about it nationally. Now, It was bad, and we should know about it. But a lot of the people who want you to know about it at this moment want you to know about it as proof of systemic racism. The number of people say, you haven't heard about this, have you? Whitey covered it up. Well, yeah, in Tulsa, Oklahoma, the white government did try to bury it for a while, and it was over time revealed. But they're not talking about that. They're talking about a conspiracy of the white history textbook writers to keep you from hearing about what happened in Tulsa, Oklahoma. The number of white people I know who want to feel guilty about their race these days are like, we covered up Tulsa, Oklahoma. We repent. This isn't the way it works. This is very much like QAnon. The difference is that the media believes this conspiracy theory, so we're forced to take it seriously. Here's what actually happens. The reason the Tulsa, Oklahoma situation isn't talked about is, one, it is Tulsa, Oklahoma. No offense to those of you in Tulsa. I would love to come hang out with you. I've never been there. I want to go see the Pioneer Woman. I love the Pioneer Woman. But the reason is it doesn't fit the template for American history that history books have long deployed. That's not a government conspiracy, and it's not proof of systemic racism, as the Democrats are saying it is. No, let me explain to you what goes on here. History books are written based on state, not federal standards. And California, those racists in California are the most dominant people when it comes to creating textbooks for the nation. The reason is because Texas also has now increased its influence, but California disproportionately buys textbooks. Therefore, the textbook writers pay most attention to the government standards in California. I assure you, as California goes more woke, we're going to have more and more politically correct history books retelling American history in the 1619 framing. And the 1619 Project has a lot to do with this. That project by the New York Times sought to revise American history to claim it began in 1619 and had always been a project for the perpetuation of slavery and racism. It was factually not true, and in fact, Nicole Hannah Jones, who wrote it, or Hannah Nicole Jones, who wrote it, walked back her claims of fact-telling and goes back and forth, whether it's a retelling, a repackaging, changing of the facts, telling new facts. She never really wants to be pinned down on the fact that she's full of crap about it, and the New York Times loves it, and the left loves it, because the left has embraced critical theory, and part of critical theory is the belief that the country is systemically racist, and part of the belief that the country is systemically racist goes to the idea that we were started in 1619 with the first slaves coming to this nation, even though it wasn't, and it was not really even at the time a colony. There was a settlement, and goes to, we're so systemically racist, racism is woven into the constitutional and institutional fabric of the country, and even the textbooks writers engage in a cover-up so that we don't know all of the racial history of the country. I'm sorry, that's just not so. That is as much of a conspiracy theory as the QAnon conspiracy theories that the media derides. So this gets back to California and the telling of American history. The telling of American history is told in such a way to progress you at the beginning of a school year to the end of a school year when you only have 1 year of American history. You have a year of world history, you've got a year of American history, you may have a year of geography. Free enterprise, used to have free enterprise and civics. Some schools still do. But you know the format of American history. The format of American history is there are pre-American settlements, then there are the colonies and the French Indian War, and then you have the pre-revolutionary to revolutionary America, and then you got to talk about the Articles of Confederation merging to the Constitutional Convention. Then you get the early Republic, the invention of the steam engine and the cotton gin. Then pre-Civil War America and the Indian Relations and Andrew Jackson. Then you get to the Civil War, and you have a whole segment of the Civil War, and then Reconstruction, which then gets you into the rise of Teddy Roosevelt and the Trust Busters and the Progressive Era, which then gets into World War I and American isolationism and the League of Nations. And then you get into the Great Depression and the period between the wars and the rise of American dominance on the global stage, and then World War II and how Americans set it out until Pearl Harbor, and then we came in and we saved the day, we wiped out the Nazis, and then we got the Cold War. And then you have the Civil Rights Movement in Vietnam, and then, oh my gosh, we're out of time, summer's here, we got to get into the Cold War, Ronald Reagan, Jimmy Carter, and all that. That's how American history is taught. You have 2 semesters in 1 year. The turmoil of Tulsa, Oklahoma happened in 1921. That is the period in which American history students are not taught about civil rights and Jim Crow and race relations and the South is bad. They're being taught about the World War I, the League of Nations, and the Great Depression. How do you squeeze in the Tulsa race riots when we're talking the Great Depression and the period between the wars? It doesn't fit the template. Now, there are the critical race theories. Others, well, the template is written by a bunch of white people, and they didn't want to talk about it. No. Those white progressives want to spend a lot of time on how the Vietnam War was bad and the Civil Rights Movement was good, and pay no attention to the racist Kennedys of Massachusetts blocking school busing. Pay attention to the racist Southerners. And as they embrace critical theory, it becomes more complex because Oklahoma was not a state during the Civil War. It was the Indian Territory. And those Indians sided with the Confederacy. In fact, the Cherokee Indians kept slavery even after the Civil War. Did you know that? I bet that's not talked about in the history books either. If the white people are so bad, why aren't they teaching you that the Cherokee Nation kept slaves after the Civil War? Well, because that gets into the intersectional amalgamation of problematic coverage of history. When white people are bad, the oppressed Native Americans had slaves. It's got to be white supremacy, and that doesn't affect it. So the reason you don't know about the Tulsa situation is it just doesn't fit the template for how American history is taught. And it has nothing to do with white people wrote it. It has to do with there are some monumental events in American history. Pre-revolution, the revolution, the steam engine and the cotton gin, the industrial revolution in America, the Civil War and Reconstruction, Roosevelt and the Trust Busters, American growth on the world stage, World War I, Woodrow Wilson. You notice they don't talk about him being the racist that he was. World War II, and then you get into Jim Crow and civil rights. That's where you teach it. Tulsa came before that. Listen, the same progressives who want you to feel bad and think that the America is systemically racist and there is a national, international book publishing conspiracy to keep you from learning about Tulsa, Oklahoma, they're the very same people who want you to know all about it and show it as proof that we're a systemically racist nation. These are the same people who condemned Tim Scott, a black man who was elected by white people in South Carolina to represent the area of the nation where Fort Sumter resides, as first a congressman and then a senator, and those good progressives call him Uncle Tim. These are the same progressives who want you to ignore J.C. Watts, who was the first black man elected statewide in Oklahoma, and he happened to be a Republican, and then became the first black man as a Republican elected to Congress south of the Mason-Dixon line. Notice how it's the same progressives who claim there's some sort of government conspiracy that kept you from ever learning about Tulsa, Oklahoma, who are the same ones who don't want you to find out who Tim Scott is, or who J.C. Watts is, or who Bobby Jindal or Nikki Haley or plenty of other black or non-white Republicans are. It's not that there's a conspiracy, it's that they want to rewrite American history and focus on all the bad and very little of the good so that they can discredit the American experiment so that they can restart it in their image, which I don't think they'll ever be successful at, but they're not going to give up without a fight.
You can follow Erick around social media at